Good afternoon and welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Today we are returning to Taiwan to look at another oolong. This is a very famous oolong called Dong Ding, or more traditionally Tung Ting. The reason I'm looking at this oolong is that it allows us to think about a couple of different factors in what makes teas different one from the other, or why we might be interested in one tea as opposed to another. Because Dong Ding originally referred to a growing area within Taiwan. It means frozen summit, and it's a small area composed of 3 villages. Traditionally, if you see the word Lugu, then you know you're in the correct area for Dongding tea. However, over time, it's become associated with a style of tea. And so if it's associated with the style of tea, we're talking about the longer oxidation and the heavier baking or roasting that goes into making a Dongding tea than you would find in, let's say, a more standard green oolong. Now, what's interesting is that, at least for me, is that although purists might say it has to come from this given area, sort of encompassed by 3 villages to be truly a Dongding tea, in other words, it's got to be the right location as well as the right means of growing. I've noticed from looking into the tea championships that are very, very popular throughout Taiwan that there's less purity or less purism, I don't know what the right word is, there's less emphasis on purity when it comes to the cultivar of tea that's used. So I've seen Dongding made from the very traditional Qingxin cultivar. We're going to be talking a lot about that later. However, I've seen it produced from other cultivars as well, which brings us to the subject of today's tea, which is a Dongding from Komin's Tea. Now, their information makes it clear where who the tea maker is. It's Tsai Brothers. It's from Nantou County in Taiwan. That's not strictly speaking, that's a very broad area. And having had a look, more specifically, their farm is in Mingjian, which I don't think is anywhere near the Tung Ting area. It was harvested in September, but as is often the case, the tea that's going to be turned into Tung Ting is allowed to rest for a bit after it's harvested before it's processed. So the chances are this would have been processed the following spring. And this is from the Jin Xuan cultivar, which is the one most associated with milk oolong tea, which is much less oxidized and much less baked. There's details there about the plucking standard and flavor profile. I'll just briefly mention: nutty, strong, and deliciously woody. And there's details there for producing it in Gongfu style, which we will come to in the third part of our video. So what we have here, as I say, is a Dongding produced in the traditional Dongding manner, but with one of the cultivars that can go into making a Dongding, and that seemed to cause less of a fuss than would otherwise be the case. Now, the reason I'm looking at this is I like Dongding tea, and I haven't tried this one, but it allows us to think about something else, and that's how different cultivars can take on different guises. So I have here, as a point of reference for me, I'm going to look at the leaves in a moment, in the second part of our video. This is the packaging for the Meishan Jin Xuan Oolong that we looked at a few videos ago. And what I'm going to do now is just take a sniff of the tea. It's very sweet, very, very sweet, slightly vegetal, and there's almost a sort of slight cream or dairy smell. So that's what I'm picking up on the nose from this tea. Now, this is the same cultivar, not grown in the same area, granted, but this is the same cultivar that's been processed differently. So I haven't tried this and I haven't opened this package. So let's see what this version smells like. Very different. I'm not picking up any of that dairy or anything really vegetal. It's sweet, and I'm picking up that kind of roasted bait smell. I'm sure there'll be a lot more once it hits once the leaves go onto a warm gaiwan and so on. But already the same cultivar, but processed differently, leads to a very different kind of experience, even on the nose. So let's just remind ourselves of this one. Very sweet, vegetal, that slight dairy. So quite different already. So what we're going to do now is take a close-up look at the different kinds of leaves so that we get a sense of what the different processing does to the appearance of the leaves as well. So see you in 2 ticks. Well, hello again. This time we are moving to our downwards facing direction. What we're looking at here are some pearls, some rolled oolong leaves. So these are from the Meishan Jin Xuan. So this is in its low oxidized, very low baking, if any at all, guise that we've already addressed. And a reminder that the perfume, if you want to put it that way, of this tea is vegetal and sweet with a hint of dairy. Now what we're going to do is just move the paper up. So if you take a look at it, actually let's take a pause. Size-wise, they look fairly standard for a rolled oolong. You can see that there's a little bit of variety in the green, but the emphasis is very much on the fact that there's green, and very often on these, as you can see some of the dried stalk that's poking out at the bottom of the rolled up leaf. So let's take a look at the Dong Ding version. Just move these into the middle a bit for you to get a better glance. Now I hope it's clear that there is some green in there. It's not sort of charcoal roasted, but I'm hoping it's fairly clear that there's a lot darker. In fact, there's some sort of yellow brown in there as well. That's nothing to do with how well otherwise the leaves have been aged. That's the processing, the longer oxidation and the baking that's at the fore of this. The one thing I would say, just looking at them, is that as far as these little rolled leaves go, I think they look even tighter in this form, and perhaps that's what the oxidation and dry and baking does to them. So let's just remind ourselves back to the low oxidation, minimal baking, if any form. So there we go. That's the appearance of our 2 sets of teas, both from the same Jin Xuan cultivar. Hello again, welcome to part 3 of our video as we turn to the tasting of the Dong Ding using the Jin Xuan cultivar. What we'll do, as is traditional at this point, is to take some already steeped tea, which we're just keeping warm. Now, Comins, at least on the packaging, don't give brewing instructions for the Western style. So what I've done is slightly tweak their brewing parameters for Gongfu. What I've got in the kettle is 6 grams of tea and 500 mils of water. The same temperature, they're recommending 90 degrees. And I did it for 4 minutes, trying to extract as much flavor as possible. The other thing I'm going to do, and it occurs to me I could have done this many times in other videos, is the tea that's here, which has already been strained, remember, this is just staying warm. There's absolutely no reason for me to throw this out into the wastewater bowl, which is over here. I can always put it back from this jug, back into the teapot, keep it warm, and enjoy a lot more tea by the time we come to the end of the video. So let's first of all take a look at this tea. 4 minutes, 90 degrees, 6 grams of tea for 500 mils of water. You can probably tell already it's got a very strong yellow colour. But before we worry about that, let's take a smell. Caramelly, I think that would be fair to say. There's a strong kind of caramel smell. The colour is a fairly vibrant yellow. It's a lot more yellow than you can see it from where you are. Maybe if I tilt it slightly, there you go. That's pretty much like for like. Let's take a little into this cup. The caramel's there with even more sweetness, as is usually the case, off the cup. It's a lot more roasted on the taste than on the smell. I'm not picking up Western style. I'm not picking up any of that roasting off the smell, just caramel, which is sort of roasted sugars, I suppose. I wouldn't say it was mild, but yes, sweetness and the roastedness. It's very smooth. It's very enjoyable. There's no sort of edges. I think the fault is probably mine. I suspect I haven't used quite enough tea to the amount of water. You can usually tell when it just tastes a little insipid. And given how strong the smell is, I don't think that's the fault of the tea. Let's recycle this tea. It's not an elegant look, but I don't like waste, and I don't think anybody else should like waste either. So let's wrap that up for later. And now we're going to come to our Eastern or Gongfu style of brewing. And here we are going to follow the parameters set out by Comins Tea. So we have our transparent jug, obviously, our drinking cup, our gaiwan lid acting as a platter, and our trusty broad-brimmed strainer. We're really not going to need this. The leaves, once they're unfurled, shouldn't slip out from underneath the lid, and in the rolled form, they certainly won't. So as a reminder, this is 5 grams of tea. We're going to use 100 mils of water at a time. Comins recommend for the first steeping 45 seconds. As we've discussed in many of our videos about rolled oolongs, the point of that is give the tea slightly longer on the first steeping because the leaves are really just compacted in upon themselves. So you need to give them time for the warmth and the water to actually percolate into the leaf, and then the other steepings can be shorter. We've sometimes done 30-30 and then back to 20. Comins are doing it a little more directly. So that's interestingly, once you let the leaves air a bit, they smell a lot stronger. There's a hint of that dairy quality once they're aired out a little. So here we go. Oh, and the wastewater bowl is off to the one side, which I think I already mentioned that. So this first steeping is 45 seconds. We'll just do that. We'll play that by ear. So yes, I wanted to address this tea because it allows us to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. It introduces us to another style of tea, specifically a style of oolong. And it's that interesting question of traditional versus modern versus does it have to come from one particular location? Can it still be the same thing if it moves away from its sort of original territory? Another interesting thing, as I say, is that you can use any number of cultivars. And oddly enough, one thing that there seems to be a good deal of disagreement on is the question of what's a traditional dong ding. Quite apart from coming from the particular location, there are some who have claimed that this baked and oxidized version is traditional, and there were other vendors, who said no, the traditional was basically a green oolong, but the roasting and the baking was done to make the product last for longer so that it could be sold outside the growing season. Basically in the same way that we've been looking at bancha teas, different ways to ensure that there's more to sell and there's a better income for growers. And the people who process it. Got to be clear that the people in Taiwan, it's not necessarily the same people growing the tea and processing the tea any more than it's the same people selling the tea. It's a sort of chain of expertise, a very integrated kind of system. So this is our first steeping. The leaves are going to take longer. Let's give you a look at those. You can probably tell that they're partially unfurled. So I'm going to give that another prolonged steeping. Maybe not 45 seconds, but I don't think 20 is going to be quite enough, but I'll keep a look and keep an eye out. Get the lid on. Yeah, caramel on the lid from the previous steeping. Colour-wise, steeping 1, a paler green, a paler yellow, it's more like gold. There you go, that's the same colour. The smell, funnily enough, now it's done Gongfu, there's more of the traditional Jin Xuan milkiness coming, or creaminess coming through on the smell, as well as the sweet and the roasted. So you can tell, I hope, just by those descriptive words that this, you can tell why this is popular. Almost fruity there. For the first steep, from leaves that aren't completely unfurled, there's a fair bit of flavour there. The sweetness, the roastedness, the caramel. I think on that first steeping, I'm not picking up the creaminess, the milkiness on the taste, or even, but it's definitely there on the mouthfeel. It shouldn't have milkiness on the taste. What I'm getting at is the mouthfeel isn't as strong as it could be. My mind isn't telling me this has a milky texture just yet, but I think that's what's making it so smooth. This is incidentally a custom-baked version of Dong Ding. I should have said that right at the start. I very much like the idea that Comins went to the roaster or baker and said, right, we'd like this particular level of roasting. I don't know if they did the same with the oxidation, but they did with the baking. What's the smell like? The roasted quality is coming through a lot stronger now. Bit of sweetness. Really, really roasty. Maybe it's coming from there. Yes, it's coming from the leaves. If I move those to one side... No, there's still a bit of roasting on the lid. The colour, that's more yellow. That's more akin to the Western style. There you go. That's like for like. On the nose, caramel sweetness, a bit of roast. Definitely more roast. Very smooth once again, but definitely more roast. Let's go with the third steeping, see where this one takes us. The leaves are starting to be unfurled, but once again, they're not fully there. They're actually unfurling just any residual water in there. The steam is causing them to unfurl. So let's give this one 20 seconds might be enough this time. We're just going to give it, basically we're playing it by ear. The first one we gave the full 45, the second one I reckon was about 30. This one, we'll play it more by ear. The other thing I wanted to say, if you really want to be economical, is I've known people who collect the steepings from Gongfu, providing they're not drinking them all at once, and they collect them. And then they drink it almost in a sort of mug as if it was a Western style brew. And the idea being that if you do it Gongfu and you're going for the same volume of water, then you're sort of making sure you've extracted the flavor profile more thoroughly than the Western style. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but if you're on a budget and you were doing something like this, I've recycled that tea, so to speak. That's not a very nice word for tea, is it? Recycled. And you can do the same with the steepings. So how are we looking here? Oh, yes. Creaminess and roastedness there. I'm hoping we'll get some mouthfeel off this steeping. Yes. Whatever compounds, I think it's pectin perhaps, convince the mind and the tongue and the nose that you've got cream, it's definitely coming off the smell there. The colour, a pretty good yellow. Yeah, that's like for like. Little bit of caramel, that's worn off a touch, but the mouthfeel is coming back. when the leaves are steeped like this and unfurled, you can see they're actually still pretty green. It's not like the charcoal roasted tea where they're pretty much uniformly brown. That's a lot more dark green. That's what I'm looking for. Roasted off the cup. Yep, the mouthfeel's there. It's like a milk oolong, but roasted. That's really, really nice. Right, we'll leave that steep. I may come back to it later. So, let's think about this tea. You can pick up Dong Ding lots of places. Places that aren't specialist in tea, specialist in Taiwan tea or oolongs. You will find Dong Ding teas lots of places. So from that point of view, they're readily available. In terms of the custom baking, lots of these vendors and lots of the farmers or the processors will be producing Dong Ding to their own version of what's the ideal roasting. So I'm sure you can get hold of Comins one without too much difficulty, but you will find what's effectively custom-baked oolong, custom-baked Dong Ding from lots of different places as well. Does it taste good? Yes, I've come to appreciate. Going to take a swig more of this one. I love that Jin Xuan mouthfeel. I've come to appreciate the taste of a roasted tea more than I used to do. Because it doesn't have to come with a sort of heavily oxidized flavor as if it was pushing towards black tea. In fact, this one, I don't know how much more oxidized it is than a standard green oolong, but it doesn't have any sort of black tea taste to it. So it's readily available, it tastes good, it's an interesting little change. You can find Dong Ding made with different tea cultivars, as we're going to be looking at a bit later in other videos. So you might be able to find something to match your taste. If you want something much more fresh and vegetal, there's the Qing Xin cultivars going into Ding Dong. If you like this milky mouthfeel, then Jin Xuan is the way to go. And it's readily available, it tastes good, and it's easy to brew. That's 3 out of 3 once again. So it remains to me simply to say happy steeping and God bless.